Welcome to Mental Health Momentum, a Silicon Slopes podcast. I'm your host, Dr. David Morgan. I'm a licensed psychologist and the Director of Mental Health Awareness at Silicon Slopes. Here at Silicon Slopes, we recognize the impact of mental health issues on workers, leaders, and businesses as a whole. On this podcast, we facilitate discussions about mental health with the goal to increase understanding and find solutions to achieve greater stability and resilience. I'd like to introduce my guest on the podcast today, Lizzi Perkins. Lizzi is an Associate Strategy Director at Boncom. With a background in communications, research, and branding, she has worked on award-winning nonprofit initiatives from a wide range of prevention topics, including mental health, substance misuse prevention, violence and injury prevention, suicide prevention, and wildfire prevention, as well as for-profit brands like Hershey's, American Airlines, and the Smithsonian. Lizzi has helped create a behavior change course for all Boncom employees to apply evidence-based messaging tactics, conducted primary research on tough-to-measure topics, and worked with creatives on campaigns to fight stigma and establish healthy social norms. Lizzi, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, David.
This is wonderful to have you here. If you live in Utah and you've seen any of the Live On billboards, that's Lizzi, or part of what you do. Yes.
Yes, that's our amazing team at Boncom, and coming up this next year, you'll start to see a lot of 988 billboards as well.
Nice.
So yeah, we cover a whole variety of topics, and we work with a lot of partners, public and private, including the Department of Health and Human Services, to talk to people about mental health and suicide prevention.
Yeah. And if listeners don't know, 988 is the 911 for suicide prevention.
Exactly.
Yes. So you can call and talk to someone, or call or text even. You don't even have to call on the phone. A lot of people, that's not their vibe anymore, right? To speak on the telephone.
Oh, absolutely. I am right there with you. I use the text 911 and text 988 way more than any calling.
Yeah, so that's an opportunity to be connected. 911 is great, and that's just kind of for general emergencies, but 988 is specific to people who are having a suicidal crisis or even thinking about those sorts of things. It's just a way to reach out and talk with someone, talk with a trained professional who will listen and can give you some advice.
Yeah, it's 24/7, free, accessible. And the coolest thing is it's not just for people who might be having any type of mental health crisis. It's also for loved ones of someone who might be going through something. So if, for example, I had a friend reach out to me and say, hey, I've been having a hard time, I've been thinking of suicide, I could then go call or text 988 and say, hey, what do I do?
Right.
And they can kind of coach you through that.
That's such a great resource, because oftentimes there's even more distress with people who are saying, well, what do I do about this, right? Almost like an Al-Anon sort of thing, where you have Alcoholics Anonymous for the person who's struggling, and then you have Al-Anon for the people who are the loved ones and the supporters of those who are struggling.
Yeah, and that's one thing that, right, in that crisis situation, it's so hard to know what to do, and 988's a great resource for that. But for most Utahns, I think it's 91% of Utahns say they've been affected by suicide in one way or another, whether it's thinking of suicide, or they know someone who's thought of suicide, or someone in their community has died by suicide. And one thing that the Live On campaign, if anyone here in Utah is familiar with it, is there's this playbook that we made for folks who they're not in a crisis, but they want to learn a little bit more about mental health. Our clients over at the Department of Health and Human Services gave us kind of a 100-page deep dive into suicide prevention, and we worked with them to cut that down to about 10 5-minute Instagram carousels. So it's, trying to make suicide prevention as accessible to Utahns as possible. Right.
And something that they're likely to consume, right?
Yes.
That's the other thing, is that there's probably a lot of amazing information in that 100-page binder, but hardly anyone's going to sit down to read that, right?
Yes. And unless you're in a crisis, there's really no impetus or any reason for you to read 100 pages on suicide prevention. But if I went to the dentist this morning, and while I'm sitting there waiting for my turn to go in, why not give people something good to do instead of just scrolling? They're already going to be scrolling.
Exactly.
Might as well scroll through something that can help them understand their mental health a little bit better.
That's exactly right. I love that. How did you end up in your career? What was the path that got you here?
Great question. I thought I wanted to be a teacher because, you kind of only know about doctors, teachers, and
Right.
lawyers.
I wanted to be a garbage man when I grew up because that's what I saw every Monday coming
Yep.
down. I thought, that looks awesome, ride around in this big truck.
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of ended up in advertising. I went out and lived in Miami and then Boulder, Colorado, working with a lot of big brands. And there's only so many focus groups you can do on why kids like chocolate or why people want to go on vacation, right? People just love chocolate and love traveling and love pizza. And so after a while, I was kind of feeling burned out. And I was like, maybe advertising's not for me. So I left my position there and was exploring other things when I found Boncom. And they convinced me to give it a try instead of, going to grad school. So I was like, okay, I'll defer for a year, see if I like it. And I just celebrated my 5 years here.
Wow.
Because there's always so much to learn, and it's fun, interesting, and meaningful to be able to make ad campaigns instead of, for pizza and beer, for mental health, awareness and suicide prevention.
Do you have any sort of personal connections with that? I mean, obviously, when you came to Boncom, at some point they ended up getting these contracts to be able to do this stuff. Do you have your own mental health journey or people Is it something special to you?
Yeah. So when I was growing up, I actually went to high school over in Hong Kong, and one of my best friends there, I didn't know at the time, she was having a lot of thoughts of suicide, and she made a couple suicide attempts. And during that time, before I knew, there were a lot of warning signs that I wished that I had known about. And in school when I, she did open up and tell me she'd been having these thoughts of suicide, I was kind of like, oh my gosh, why did I not know that? Why did I not realize? And we were able to talk to her mom. We were able to speak to one of our other friends' moms who was a teacher at the school who could help her with, she was getting bullied for being lesbian. And that was a kind of starting point in my journey to caring a lot more about mental health. I worked at a residential treatment center for a while, and my sister's a rec therapist up at the University of Utah, Huntsman Mental Health Institute. So I've got kind of a lot of ties to mental health. And then I had a lot of mental health struggles, challenges when I was coming out in a few years ago to my family and friends as being part of the LGBTQ community.
I love the kind of the personal association with that. And you were talking about your friend in Hong Kong and how it sounds like you almost felt guilty, right? When she disclosed that she was having these thoughts, but they're not really recognizable most of the time, right? I mean, it's not like people are walking around and there's some sort of visible thing where you could say, oh, that person's probably having suicidal thoughts. So I don't know, there's a lot of need for guilt for people, right?
No, not at all. That was something that she was also really great at the time to say, hey, it's not your fault. You've been great. And once I did know, I was able to then say, check in on her, have her over, spend the night at my house if she was having a particularly tough day, and get her the help she needed. And I realized there's no need for guilt. Sometimes we feel it anyway, and if that's the case, there are places to go to get help for yourself. And that's where suicide doesn't just affect the person who might be having thoughts of suicide. That can also impact the mental health of people around them. And it's so great when, as a community, people can come together and acknowledge that, hey, it's okay that, we're all having these mental health challenges. It's just about how do you work through that together.
Getting over that initial hump, right? The hump that it's not okay to talk about. You and I were talking about this before the podcast. and about some just these common misconceptions about mental health and suicide prevention. And one of them is that if you are worried about someone and their mental health, talking to them about suicide prevention, they think, well, I don't want to ask them about that because that puts the idea in their head. But that's not the case.
No, absolutely false. There's no basis for that because, right, you think if, let's say, I'm someone who you can think of any other physical health
Right.
illness, injury, disorder. For example, I tore my ACL back in September, and when someone said, hey, are you doing okay? How's your knee? I loved that they were reaching out. I loved that people were, dropping by, were able to talk to me about it. And I feel like it's obviously different, but it's similar in that, right? Just because you ask someone if they're thinking of suicide or you ask someone how they're doing, it's not going to make them be doing any better or worse, just the asking of that question.
And in a lot of cases, even the very asking of the question is helpful, right? I mean, so I can't think of any circumstance where it would make it worse to go to someone and say, how are you? Are you feeling okay? Are you feeling hopeless? Are you feeling like wanting to do something to harm yourself? It just gives them an opportunity to be able to answer. They may answer truthfully, they may answer untruthfully, but then that gives them the control to be able to say something about it. Whereas otherwise, they're like, well, I don't want to burden her. I don't want to say anything. You're giving them an opportunity to say something.
Yeah, and you absolutely let them know that you're a safe space.
Right.
That even if they're not ready to disclose or ready to talk about it right now, if they are ready in the future, or if some point in the future they are having burnout at work or going through a hard time with a relationship or grieving, they know you're a safe person to come to. And that's kind of the most important thing, is knowing there's someone who you can talk to and that you're not alone.
Right. I don't know what it is about human nature, but there's this, it's a very dichotomous sort of thing, because on the one hand, we're about the most dependent biological creatures that exist, right? Almost every other species within weeks or months is able to live on their own, defend themselves. Human beings, after a few months, you can't do anything, right? I mean, we're completely worthless for almost decades. And then, you get old enough to be able to do something about your life. Yet at the same time, we're kind of fiercely independent, and we think, well, I can't reach out to someone for help. I have to be able to do this on my own. I have to be able to manage all my mental health issues on my own. And it's just not true. Not only can we not do it usually very effectively by ourselves, but we're designed to reach out to each other.
Yeah, and it's not just with suicide prevention. A few months ago, or maybe last year, the Surgeon General of the United States released this announcement that loneliness is an epidemic,
right?
And how if people are feeling isolated or lonely, that doesn't just impact, right, likelihood of dying by suicide, it also impacts other health outcomes. And so that's where mental health and physical health are just so closely linked. Yes. You can't really have great physical health if you don't have great mental health, because then how are you going to, even motivate yourself to eat,
right,
shower, exercise? And if you don't have good physical health, it's harder to kind of stimulate those positive chemicals in your brain.
Right. I love that you talked about that, the relationship between our mental and physical health. And like you said, loneliness, when you said it affects health outcomes, like you said, you're not talking about mental health outcomes, you're talking about physical health outcomes. And my wife was doing a podcast or something on our social media a while ago, and she asked, most of her followers are middle-aged women, and she asked, how many of you feel lonely in your social circles? And it was like 75% of them said that they feel lonely, even though they're surrounded by people in different settings, or they're well connected in social media, but there's still just this sense of loneliness, which I think is definitely a contributor to depression, which is one of the strongest predictors of suicide attempts, is major depressive disorder. And so, yeah, staying connected. In a lot of the messaging that, if like I said, if you're here in Utah and you drive by and you see the billboards, most of the messaging is directed at communication and reaching out being the one to say, hey, can I help you in this particular situation? Can I do this for you for a time or whatever it is?
Yeah, because you think, even my sister-in-law, she just had a baby, and how much harder is it for her to say, hey, I need some help. Can you come watch my kids while I go to the grocery store? Or can you, watch my baby so I can have a mental health break? How much easier is it for you as someone who cares for someone who might
Right.
be having a big life change, or to go up to them and say, hey, how are you doing? And so, yeah, a lot of our messaging with the Live On campaign is focused around what are the actual things people can say, because people want to help.
Right.
They just don't always know how. And so we try to give people the words to say, like, can I watch your gun until you feel safe?
Right.
Or asking directly, are you having thoughts of suicide, can save a life?
Right.
Because if people know what to say, they'll do it. It's really just, right? I feel like people in Utah have the best intentions. They're so kind. Everyone's willing to lend a hand, reach out, help each other. Both mental health, we just haven't been trained how.
I know, it's it's the craziest thing, because I think you're right, and the desire is there, and the community is there, and in most cases, a lot of people are connected with different social groups, but they, I don't know, it's just this thing where we feel like we still feel awkward about it. I don't know.
Yeah, it feels like we've gotten over the stigma of, oh yeah, I know it's okay to not be okay, or it's
Right.
okay to have a tough time. It feels like that stigma is starting to decrease. But yeah, there's still that awkwardness of, okay, they know it's okay if they're not okay, but what do I say?
Right. Is it okay for me to know that they're not okay?
Yes.
And is it okay for me to say something to them about them not being okay? And then the person that's not okay, like you said, in almost every circumstance, is just saying, yes, I'd love to have some help. And at the same time, like you said, you put it there and they can take it or not, but you've offered it. And that's the thing. It's kind of incumbent on all of us, in every situation to reach out and communicate, just communicate better, right? Communicate more and better. That brings up the education piece, because I think oftentimes what happens is people they just don't know what to do. They don't know what to say. They don't know, like I said, if it's going to make it worse, what's going to make it better. And so outside of like billboards and stuff, I mean, what are you guys doing to educate? If anything, maybe that's not your job. I don't know.
Yeah, great question. So we do have an online course. We have one in English that is 10-ish Instagram posts. It's going to be launched on a website in the next couple weeks or so. And then we also have one for specifically tailored to veterans, and one specifically tailored to our Latino audience here in Utah, because Latinos are traditionally underserved, and it's also harder to access a lot of help, mental health help, in Spanish specifically for folks who might not be bilingual. And so we've got these 3, we call them playbooks, right? It's just kind of the overview, trying to guide you through how to navigate some of those conversations, or even after a suicide, how do you navigate what to do, what to say, what's going to be safe or unsafe. And so that's kind of the main program that we have. And then the Department of Health and Human Services, they have additional trainings that, for example, our workplace, Boncom, we had someone come in and do what's called a QPR training.
Mm-hmm.
So, QPR.
Yes, but right now I can't remember what it stands for.
Question. I can't remember the P. And refer, I think.
Yes.
And so teaching us in our workplace, hey, here's how you ask.
Yeah.
And that's been really amazing. My supervisors and managers do a great job letting our team know, hey, if you do need a mental health day, it's okay to take it.
Right.
If you want to talk, it's a safe space. And so by having everyone in our agency be trained in this, everyone knows what to say or what not to say. So we offer mostly stuff that's accessible online throughout Utah. You don't need someone coming in person. It just is a lot more scalable. But there are in-person classes, trainings, people who can come to your workplace to help with burnout, employee retention, and things like that.
So when you talked about that, you have the English, and then for Latinos and for veterans, it's all suicide prevention, but it's just with a different focus.
Yeah, because we know that veterans face different challenges than maybe non-veteran stay-at-home dad.
Right.
And so it approaches the topic slightly differently, and we share a lot of stories of lived experience. And it's a lot easier to connect with someone who has been through something similar to you. And then even with our Live on Latino, that whole message is tailored and it has a specific look and feel that's more relevant. We hired Latino contractors to help film and develop it with us to make sure that all those cultural nuances are captured because, right, me as a 30-year-old white woman can't really know what to say to either of those audiences, not being a veteran or Latino myself. And so we always try to make sure that we're representing real people, real experiences. So the kind of, so what do I do? What do I say is more applicable.
I love the idea of the real experiences as well, because I think we may have said this before, but people who are struggling with suicidal thoughts, oftentimes they feel very alone. They feel very isolated. They feel very unique in their experience. And that's why they're hesitant to reach out, because they say, well, who would understand me anyway? Who would understand what I'm going through? Where the truth is, a lot of people will understand what you're going through because they've either been through it themselves or they've been through it with someone that's been, close to them, and they've learned kind of vicariously through those experiences. And so when you're able to get people in there that have had real life experiences with that, I think that will resonate very much with people, and they'll be like, oh, that's a person who's going through what I'm going through.
Absolutely. And that's why we love to partner with people like you, because there are so many resources within specific communities. Like Silicon Slopes has a mental health initiative. Mm-hmm. The Chamber of Commerce in Utah has a mental health initiative and partnered with Live On to create a toolkit for workplaces to know how to address it, what to do, what to say. And so all of these specific groups and communities oftentimes have amazing trained people who already are serving that community, and we just try to promote that.
What do you think in terms of, so suicide prevention is obviously kind of a niche sort of thing in mental health. How does getting an overall education on mental health, overall mental health awareness, how do you think that helps, or does it help with suicide prevention specifically?
This might be a little bit controversial. I don't think awareness really does anything, right? If you look at, I know I should wear a bike helmet,
right?
But do you even have a bike helmet? I don't have a bike helmet. I do have a bike that is currently in disrepair, but right, there's can be a disconnect there. And so I think mental health awareness is an amazing first step where, right, if you're aware that this is something going on, whether it's yourself, a loved one, an acquaintance who you see at work, a neighbor, someone you know is lonely, is feeling isolated, they may be going through some kind of mental health challenge. It might not be suicide specifically, but I think the most important thing is that, so what?
Right.
What do I do if my neighbor's feeling lonely, or if I see a coworker who I think is not acting the way they usually act? And so I think mental health awareness is the first step to creating action.
Right.
Which, like we talked about earlier, I think regardless of what the issue is, whether it is a physical injury, a mental health challenge, or even, a spiritual rut, connection is something that can help through all of those. And so, I think mental health awareness, knowing when to check in, why to check in, is the first step. And then helping people know how to check in is going to be the biggest impact on our state and our communities.
I don't think that's controversial at all.
Okay.
I think that's great. And because you're absolutely right. Awareness is the first step, and that's where it has to start. If you don't even know about it, then you have to achieve some sort of understanding that there is an issue. But if it stops there, then it's no good. It has to progress into action where we figure out, well, what is it that I'm going to do? And each person taking individual accountability, right? Saying, what can I do in my sphere of influence to have an impact on people, whether that's reaching out to someone different every day or whatever it is, just saying, how you doing? If you want to talk about anything, I'm a safe place where you can talk about that. Can you imagine if everyone did that?
Yeah, it would be amazing.
You'd be out of a job, at least for
Yes.
this campaign, right?
You know what? I would
Wouldn't that
gladly
be wonderful?
take that.
Yeah,
Yes.
me too. Maybe I'll go back and go teaching, and then I don't have to be a psychologist anymore, right?
Yeah.
We resolve all the mental health issues. Well, this is awesome. Thank you so much, Lizzi, for this conversation. Thank you for what you're doing at Boncom. I know that there are thousands and thousands of people who are grateful for that, grateful for the education. Anyone whose life has been touched by suicide, I'm sure every time they see those billboards, they go, yes, this is maybe one less person who might have to go through this. So that's amazing. I'm glad you switched from pizza and beer to this.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me, David.
You're welcome. Thank you, everyone, for listening today. We're trying to keep the mental health conversation going and finding ways to improve. And change starts with each one of us, so never underestimate your potential. We invite you to tune in frequently for engaging guests, beneficial discussions, and more solutions to help you increase your mental health momentum.